agency. Herminia has worked for DSHS for 36 years. She does not look like it, right? Through the years, she has weaved her passion for immigration policy, continuous improvement, technology, and equity, diversity, and inclusion into every position she's held. Outside of work, she pursues justice, like I said, in the community, justice at the intersection of race and her faith, our faith. She has been a keynote speaker and panelist on college campuses and conferences. She believes in the power of story and leads bilingual story circle workshops to support immigrant leaders. Now, her grandchildren, they call her not Herminia, but they call her Lita, short for abuelita. She enjoys family traditions like making Christmas tamales. She appreciates visiting places that center the stories of the historically marginalized. For example, San Diego's Chicano Park and Cheech Marin's Chicano Museum. She acknowledges that none of us travel alone. Our ancestors come with us. Herminia, Esqueda, please come to the forefront. We are here. We are here to see you. All right. You're on.
Hello. Buenos días or buenas tardes. When it's noon, is it buenos días or buenos tardes? So thank you, Anita, and thank you for flying through all of that. So today we're going to talk, and I am kind of losing my voice, so I just hope I can make it all the way through today. Today we're going to talk about el poder de nuestra historia, the power of our story. We have all experienced stories growing up, and we're going to talk about how story has been part of our community for generations. Our abuelas shared stories while they were making tortillas. Our tias share stories when they're sharing chisme. And our families share stories around a meal, also called sobremesa. It's how we share traditions and values and history and language. So we're going to experience, hopefully today, the power of story. But I can't continue without also mentioning what is happening in our country today. And that I'm sharing this power of story also because of what is happening today. In trying to take back the narrative for the false narratives that have been created about our community. Last week, the Supreme Court made a decision that immigration enforcement can use the following factors to select who to detain. They can use race or ethnicity, Latin looking, because we know there's a phenotype that they're looking for, a specific look that they consider looking Latino. Skin color, brown. Language, if we speak Spanish. Location, if we're seeing it at a car wash or a Home Depot. And if we look like we work in a low wage occupation, like farm workers. We should not live in a country, in the dissent decision, Justice Sonia Sotomayor said, we should not have to live in a country where the government can seize anyone who looks Latino, speaks Spanish, and appears to work a low-wage job. And why it's important for us to create our own narrative and our own stories. And why we also honor this space as a multilingual space, where we switch from Spanish to Spanglish to English, and in our last presentation last week, even indigenous languages. We don't translate everything to English, and it's deliberate because we want to support inclusion of all languages and cultural preservation and linguistic development for all. If we translate everything, it centers the English speaker and suggests that all of the other languages are secondary. And we value cultural context by leaving some words and phrases, idioms, and lyrics in their original form The space preserves and celebrates the distinct cultural identity associated with language. Today, in its part of sharing our stories, I'm going to share some dichos or some idioms and phrases that we use, and they're going to be in Spanish. And I'm not going to translate. I'm going to ask you to actually translate in the chat. We're going to move beyond this English first thinking, and because selective translation challenges this bias that everything has to be in English, and instead fosters a more balanced and respectful interaction between languages. It supports linguistic growth, validation of our mother tongue, and opportunity to engage in that mother tongue, and reflects the organic way that bilingual people, those of us who are bilingual, naturally live and talk in our communities. So our agenda for today, we're going to talk about the role of story, food and story, music and story, story in community, and then I'll end it with my story. So in the chat, you have your first question. How did your family, faith community, or friends share stories as you were growing up? What did that look like for you? Where were those stories shared? When were those stories shared? So in the chat, around the table, yes, mainly shared around meals, in the kitchen, around family, the dinner table, during dinner, making tamales, Lupe, right? Around food. That is so centered to our culture. Family gatherings and fiestas, a lot of stories shared during special holidays, recalling the past, memories. That's what stories are, is recalling the past. And we're going to talk about those things today while decorating for holidays or wrapping presents for birthdays. I love that we all experience sharing stories, and stories go beyond just conversation and actually has a role in our culture. We have been sharing stories for generations and generations. Before there was a written word, there was oral storytelling. I love this indigenous proverb from the Hopi. Those who tell the stories rule the world. Lots of stories being told today. False stories, stories not shared by our community. We need to highlight our own stories and pay attention to who is telling the story. We should be sharing our own stories and not have others share those stories about us, because they never get it right. And that's how you create stereotypes and criminalize entire communities when these false stories are allowed to be shared. But we know that that happens because they're being told by those who rule the world. Another quote from Tommy Orange from the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribe. The world was made of stories, nothing else, just stories and stories and stories. That is how we've been able to share our values, our traditions, our language, and stories of our ancestors, our history. And I love that Estefania always shares books with us, stories. Read the books. There's so many books written by us about us, instead of those books that are written about us that are not by us. And it starts from the indigenous people. Our ancestors are indigenous. People that inhabiting the indigenous people were the people that inhabited this land or existed in a land before the earliest of times and from before the arrival of the colonists. It was the colonists that brought the written word, who they thought the written word is above everything. And we actually resisted because we had been sharing the oral word, the oral narrative for centuries already, and it had done us well. And those stories were rich and integral parts of this indigenous life that were shared through poetry and prayer and other forms of just cultural and oral discourse. Stories break down barriers and create access. Yes, thank you, Ray. They transmit culture. Our food, our traditions, as all of you mentioned, stories that are shared around the dinner table. What are we talking about? Except stories in context with our culture and our families and things that have happened. They share identity and community. It's how our identity was passed on. Our love, even though we don't speak our indigenous languages and we don't have a direct connection to our indigenous roots, it still lives in us because culture, identity, food, community has all been passed on, and we'll be sharing about how that's been passed on. And because, and in light of the Supreme Court justice decision, my language, my story in my language is my form of resilience and resistance. Yo hablo español cuando pueda. And education and wisdom. Before there was school, they were still educated. There was still wisdom that was passed on by our elders and our communities. The wisdom of I think of this picture of the abuela with her granddaughter and the wisdom and education that she passed on. It's funny because when we use the word te falta educación, you lack education. We're not talking about formal education. We're talking about common sense or somebody who's rude and that you lack education when you don't know how to behave yourself. We're not even talking about academics. Cuando te falta educación is because you don't know how to behave yourself. And there's a lot of people out there right now que les falta educación. Sam, thank you for sharing. He's reading Living Beyond Borders, Growing Up Mexican American. Yes, connect with your roots. And that is our theme, hasta la raíz. And it's the reason why we came up with our theme, because we need to connect with our roots and our ancestors. So thank you, Sam, for sharing that. And it doesn't always look like this written story. It looks like poetry. It looks like prayer. It looks like art and music and food. There's all forms of different stories. It is Western culture that has told us that it needs to be found in a book, which I love. I think we need more books written by us and more stories shared in different ways, honoring our ancestors by doing it creatively and connecting to our traditions and culture. So speaking of stories, share the name of a character or urban legend or story that you connect directly with your culture. Did you grow up with those stories? Those urban legends that got passed on and on by your parents, by your primos, by your tias about certain stories. Yes, Lupe, that's what I was getting at. La Llorona. We don't even have to talk to each other. And how is it that most of us have heard the story of La Llorona? So much scarier than Bloody Mary. Very scary. That's the oral narrative. These stories have been passed on for generations and generations. Chupacabras, Wakanda. Yes. Because they're forms of stories of connecting to our culture that we may even think of as silly. Or I know my mom would get after us if we talked about La Llorona, because now, we're not supposed to share those stories if we're now in our Christian faith. But they're stories that connect to our culture, and they're fun and ways that our community connects through these common urban legends and characters and stories. Lechuzas. And I had never heard of some of these urban legends, so I'm just going to name a few that I found. There's the Chupacabra from Puerto Rico, La Llorona from Mexico, Chihuahua. If you've heard of any of these, I'd love to know who they are and what the story is, from the Dominican Republic. El Silbón from Venezuela and Colombia, Sombreron from Guatemala. Just urban legends and folklore of stories from Peru, the Pachamama. You'll have to tell us about that one, Estefania. And these are folklore and storytelling. I imagine stories told like what we would do now around a fire or around a meal, but these were usually shared by tias and primos to the younger kids to scare them that we could see La Llorona in the tree while we were all playing outside in the dark. And so many stories connected to our culture and stories that connect between our indigenous roots and maybe Christian blend, stories of the Virgin Mary apparitions and how quickly those spread, even though there wasn't social media or television back then. The sightings of miracles, how do you think those were shared? But by oral story. Stories of treasure. I read this story that people were actually lying that there was gold found in the north, so the colonists would leave their area to go follow the gold. So treasure tales, that's how they started as well. um Selena legendary stories. Yeah, the whole Selena story too that has grown and spread. African folklore, oral narratives that came from West Africa when the enslaved were now part of South America and North America, and their stories, and found that the story of the tortoise and the hare was actually an oral narrative from West Africa that we still hear of today. So how did story become so important, and the way that we pass down information and tradition? It's because the brain does something when it hears story. There's actual dopamine surge when we hear story. There's oxytocin that gets released that makes us more sensitive to social cues when we hear story. There's neural coupling and mirroring of emotions that happens when somebody is telling their story and they start crying. Don't you start crying? That's because our brains are literally connecting. There's this neural coupling and mirroring happen with our emotions. The storyteller and the listener are actually in the story together. When you tell a story, your brain doesn't know current from history. It thinks it's happening right now. And as you're listening to the story, your brain thinks you're in the story. That's another reason why we get emotional when hearing stories, when watching something on TV and we find ourselves crying and don't know why. Because our brain thinks they're part of the story. And because there's this emotional simulation happening, it opens our minds to empathy. Isn't that what we need today? When there's connection and our brain is now full of all these great chemicals of dopamine and oxytocin, now you're in this frame of mind where you can actually learn new things and have empathy for the person that you're connecting to in this story. So this tells me that in today's world, we need more storytelling because we need more empathy. And we need less dehumanization. We are each human, deserving to be seen and heard and treated with dignity and respect. And there's also danger in some storytelling. And I'm going to talk about it briefly, but I can't talk about story without mentioning the trauma experienced in storytelling. Because we return to the story when telling the story, our brain returns to that place. And if you are sharing a traumatic story, you risk becoming re-traumatized. So when asking someone to share their story, be very careful that you're not asking them to share a traumatic story that is going to re-traumatize them. Sharing a traumatic story can be healing, but it needs to be in the right space, in a safe space, And if you are in a generic space, I don't know how else to call it, then you're putting that person in danger of being re-traumatized. I've seen people share their traumatic stories and then say, oh my goodness, I had no idea that that was going to affect me like that. Because they return to that traumatic space and place. And what is that trauma? It could be historical trauma that our community has experienced. It can be transgenerational racial trauma that is actually carried in our DNA from our ancestors. It can be personal racial trauma, physical trauma, vicarious trauma. We see our community being demonized and mistreated in horrific ways on the media. And every time you watch that, because we are a collective culture, meaning we live in community, we experience vicarious trauma when we see someone from our community being treated that way. Limit your social media and the media and understand that if your body is feeling something, it's probably because of the vicarious trauma you're experiencing from watching someone in your own community face these horrific things. Microaggressions and gaslighting are all forms of trauma that we need to be aware of when sharing our stories, because your body is going to take you back to that place. So, as we share stories, for the most part, those aren't the stories we share when we're in community. When we're with familia eating food, we're not sharing our traumatic stories, unless you're taking your prima aside to talk about something. You're sharing stories of joy and stories of tradition and stories of culture and stories that make you laugh. And you can still learn about our communities with those stories without having to make somebody share a traumatic story. So we're going to move on to food and story. So glad so many of you mentioned food and the table as part of our storytelling. There's a documentary that I'm going to show a clip to. And the documentary, the chef in the documentary is named Adán Medrano. And he says, food does not have a nationality, food has roots. Because he's talking about that area in southern Texas and northern Mexico where they created there was no border there. Everyone there shared the same foods, the same agriculture, the same indigenous food. And so to them, there's no Tex-Mex. It's just their food because it's the root. It has roots in their geographic area. He also says we have to be the ones to tell our stories. And there's a woman at the very end of the documentary. It's available on Netflix or Amazon Prime. I think I watched it on Amazon Prime last night. At the end, she says, food preserves our memories. Can you imagine all the oxytocin and is happening, dopamine is happening when we're sharing around food and telling stories? And that is what makes it stick in our memories and in our brains. So I'm going to show, you're going to have to give me a thumbs up because as soon as I hit share, well, you tell me because I didn't have to stop sharing. I've left it alone. So I am going to show the trailer to this documentary. Can you see the trailer on the screen? Can you just give me a thumbs up? Okay, great.
Yes.
All right. And now it's 2.5 minutes long. I just think it's a beautiful trailer that talks about the main points of the documentary. And give me a thumbs up if you can hear it.
The sound, I can't hear the sound any longer.
I think you have to share your screen different, Herminia.
It seemed like it was working at
Okay.
first and then stopped.
I was afraid of that. Okay, because I didn't stop sharing and reshare. It's making me do that for videos now. I don't know what. Okay, I'm gonna share again and then reshare the sound again.
This would be a celebration of the American roots.
Oh, tienen nopalitos.
The Culinary Institute of America, they weren't doing my food. It just wasn't there. It was invisible, nothing.
It was a way for me to bring something tangible from things that are gone.
We need a cow's head, a cabeza de vaca.
Say, we've got it.
Even my friends freak out. I think one of them threw up once.
This is survival food for us.
The Texas Mexican cuisine gives you an opportunity to see how differences are embraced.
I'm often asked, do you like Tex-Mex food? We never ate Tex-Mex food at home. Enough with the cheese. Tex-Mex it's bi-Anglos, four Anglos.
The chili queens of San Antonio were in all the plazas in the center of the city. These women have to be recognized for their business smarts.
Este es un postre que se llama jericaya.
Oh, that's nice.
It's very, very nice.
You cannot buy the love that goes into cooking. You just can't.
You make it good, like Grandma used to make it. I bring them memories. It's comida casera, just like home.
Para mí la cocina es convivencia con la familia.
Y digo familiar, no nada más mis parientes, ¿verdad? Siempre se crea un ambiente muy bonito.
Native people in the state of Texas are the forgotten people, period.
We live in a racist society, sadly. If we look to the books, we're not there. We have been erased.
The fence, as innocuous as it looks, is really kind of a death symbol.
Your ancestors have been standing here, breathing this air for 10,000 years. And that's got to be empowering.
Cooking is part of art activism because it's part of our culture, and I want to keep it up.
Salud. Her voice is in the winds. She's talking to us. She's sending us a message.
Now we've arrived. We're telling our story.
I hope it's a story that is about becoming what we can become.
I love that. It's a story about becoming and what we can become. It's just a beautiful documentary. They also, and it was Amazon Prime. I'm from Texas, and they did teach me in elementary school that all the Native Americans are dead. Coming to Washington and seeing how they do land acknowledgements in elementary schools for the indigenous people who still exist, just completely different. Yes. And that's what they'd like us to know, that we've been erased, that our indigenous roots have been erased, but they haven't. And our food, as you can see, continues on. I loved all these images here because they represent indigenous food that we still eat today. They may have erased our indigenous culture or indigenous traditions and language, but we still carry our ancestors. You can see my indigeneity in who I am. Both my grandmothers look completely indigenous with darker, beautiful skin, and these foods that have been here for thousands and of generations. The nopales, the tuna, the corn. There's said to have been thousands of varieties of corn and beans. I'm also going to show a little bit about the documentary itself. They interviewed Chef Adan, and I'll share my screen again. I forgot I wasn't sharing because I had to stop sharing. I'm going to share, and it's going to meet me again, some clips about the documentary, and then just hear him talk about it at the very end. So they're like 3 short little clips. I don't know if I'll be able to talk in between just because it makes me keep stopping. Let's share again. Audio.
the center of the city. So Alamo Plaza was one of the main spaces that the women congregated to sell their food. This is where you could find the locals who needed to eat. This is where tourists who were visiting wanted to eat as well. We didn't have the restaurants that we know today that were indoors. So the women just created their puestos, their little stands, and prepared food. I know my own great-grandmother, Teresita Cantu. She was a vendor, a chef. My mother did tell the story of my great-grandmother being a chili queen and using the word chili queen. The little baby is my mother, who's now 95 years old. So my great-grandmother, she made tamales, carne guisada, pollo guisado, arroz con pollo, mole, chile relleno. I was thinking about nopalitos and capirutada. So I think those are the foods that she must have made because those are the ones that my mother made. So yeah, everyone had a different style. Everyone had their forte in what food they were going to prepare and how they prepared it, the food that they had grown up with. And so that allowed for the diversity in the meals that were unique and distinct to each one of those stands. These women have to be recognized for their smartness and for their business smarts.
Let's do that.
All right. I like talking to people. You enjoy it because you learn things. You learn things about your Hispanic culture. I just love being here. I love the business.
I always said that I always made homemade cooking, and that's what people like.
Mama knows best. Mama cooks better. When a customer tells me, golly, I just finished eating this plate, and it reminds me of my grandma. Like, you make it good, like grandma used to make it. I bring them memories. And he goes, that's why we like eating here, because it's comida casera, just like home. That's what it is.
You bring them memories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As Mexican Americans and indigenous peoples in the United States have been erased for so long, everybody who has written about that experience, they're mainly not. If you see it, if you read it after you see the film, I think it'll answer some questions, because I'm told that the film really raises a lot of questions about indigenous people. Who really are we now that we have been erased? And I think the bottom line is we have to be the ones to tell our story. And that's why I'm thrilled that the Latino film, that the Chican Indie is happening. I mean, I know what a film festival can do because I started one. And for us to be part of it is really great. I would like to just say about that last clip, to change the subject abruptly. It's Maria Sanchez is talking about memory, right?
Yes.
The idea that a restaurant owner knows and understands food beyond selling it, making it and making a profit, is something that's very important, and it's not very common. But it is common in our community, and it's common in many, many communities like ours. She says, I bring them memories. And the main thing about that is that she understands that food, it's not only preserving our memories, but it's also helping to connect the community, because every time we eat, we share. This is the power of the food that she understands, and I think it's great. And again, I want to give a shout out to all of the chefs who invited us into their homes. They're all women. Every single chef that's in the film, they're all women. Chef street vendors, chef caterers, and chef owners of restaurants. And we didn't go out and say, we're going to have women chefs. We went out and said, we want to speak to people who really know, who really understand what food is, not just And then Chila mi otra, there is a power to food, as Celeste de Luna was saying in that clip. And that's what we got. And women are the ones who know. And again, I say, it's ironic because here I am, a man, talking to women about it.
But we appreciate it. I mean, we appreciate you raising the consciousness on that and how women have been erased from history, including the food industry history. Because there's, I understand the idea of male chefs in the kitchen, but, growing up, it was always the females preparing the food. It was always the females with the treasured, sacred recipes, and every once in a while they'd be kind enough to give you all the ingredients.
Men who are chefs, when they're interviewed properly, will always say, it's my mother who taught me. And line cooks who are men will say, well, I went home and I asked my wife. And yet they're not listed as consultants. Certainly they're not paid as consultants. So that's something that I think the film does, and I think it does very beautifully. We're very happy that the film has.
I love how it highlights, if there's any highlights for you, go ahead and share them in the chat. I just love how it highlights women, honors women for the role we play in creating our meals for our families. But it's more than just a meal. I agree that they're memories that we're creating with our food. And there's corazón in our food. And so honor the cooks in your families, and honor your mothers and your abuelitas and anyone who did the cooking for you. I'm going to share just really quick some foods that have indigenous roots, that have memories for me. And if they have memories for you, I'd love for you to share them in the chat. I'm going to just kind of fly by them because we continue and talk about music and story. And so I'm just going to quickly go by these foods. If you have a memory about it, please share. They had barbacoa in the video. Barbacoa is the cabeza of the vaca, the cow head. And I have a memory of my mom buying cow head for $5 in Alamo, Texas, and then taking it home and covering it in foil and putting it in the oven at night. And then we'd have it ready in the morning. And then she'd take all the meat off the head. She'd chop up the lengua and to make barbacoa tacos. Yes, Lupe, barbacoa for breakfast with a big red soda. Yes. Those of you who know barbacoa have a memory connected to it. They used to have El Ranchito that served the best barbacoa back in the day. And then I just found this clip in Spanish that showed, how to make a barbacoa. The real traditions that go back to our indigenous roots is making it in the ground. Barbacoa meant in the ground. They used to make a pozo, and that documentary actually shows a family making a pozo, or a hole in the ground, to make the barbacoa. But even when I was growing up, it was in the oven. And also urban legend that the ranchers used to keep the good beef for themselves and give the head as leftovers or payments to the workers. And even though they said it was urban legend, I believe that. I believe that even if they didn't do it as payment, that they discarded it because it was a head. It doesn't even look like it has any meat on it. And we saw it as a delicacy. And we can see that in taco stands today. We can see that they sell tripas and that's the seso, the brain that comes in with the barbacoa, and menudo, things that people would throw away and discard, we made into delicacies. Sam says he remembers being very young and opening his abuelita's fridge and seeing the cow head looking right back at me. I had nightmares for weeks. Yes, we had whole cow heads on our kitchen table, in the refrigerator, and in the oven. And Samantha also shared barbecue was learned from the indigenous. Yes, Samantha, I read that too. It was actually came from the Caribbean, from the Taino people who cook their meat in the ground. That's how you see documentaries in Puerto Rico and Cuba. That's how they're cooking their meat, because that's where it originated. Thank you for sharing that, Samantha. Nopales. I love nopales. I didn't always love nopales, but there's something about nopales now that are very nostalgic to me. And I love being able to go to Fiesta Foods and see the woman pelar or clean the nopales right in front of me. And they're so fresh. My mom lives in Idaho and she goes, oh, we don't get nopales like that. So I feel extra special that I can get fresh nopales at Fiesta Foods where they're trimmed and all of the espinas, thorns are torn off of it. And I love them. I love them sauteed with eggs. That's my favorite way to eat nopales, but you can also have it in a nopal salad. So anybody who has a story about nopales or likes their nopales, please share. And then, as many of you have mentioned already, is tamales. All of these foods that I've mentioned, the barbacoa, the nopales, and the tamales are all indigenous foods.
Can you share your screen again?
Oh my goodness, I'm so
keep
sorry.
going back and forth. I'm so sorry.
Yes.
Thank you. Sorry
Thank
to interrupt.
you for reminding me. No. Gosh. So this was my picture of the barbacoa and the ranchito, and then the picture of the nopales and nopalitos, and then the tamales, or some people, okay, I got it. Correct you if you say this wrong. When a singular tamal is a tamal, not a tamale. So don't say, I'm going to go eat my tamale. It's a tamal. One tamal has no E on the end. It's a tamal. When it's plural, they're tamales. So just trying to correct, because it's a pet peeve when I hear somebody say that. Tamal. And tamal is actually a Maya word, comes from a Maya word. An Aztec word. And it is more than 8,000 years old, 8,000 BCE, coming from the Mayas and the Aztecs, where maíz was ground with a metate, and tamales were an easy way to have portable food by putting it in this little nice bundle. And now and integral to celebrations and festivals, and again, still passed on to us and our families to this day. I even have my kids that want to pass it on to their kids and learning how to make tamales. El mocajete. So share your tamale stories in the chat. Share your mocajete stories in the chat. Anita says, my uncle made tamales for me. I'm not tamales, nopales, and I've been in love ever since. Estefania, we called it pachamanca. Cooking method involves cooking meat, potatoes, and vegetables in underground ovens heated by red stones, creating a spiritual connection between the earth, fire, and community. Yes, not to mention a spiritual connection with our food and with our stories. So mocajetes have been around since all of this has been around since pre-colonial Hispanic times. Mocajetes are made from volcanic rock. My mother-in-law had this little tiny mocajete that I have saved that I almost don't even want to use because it's been passed on to me. So it's like now an heirloom for our family, this little mocajete. Somebody else shared Mike, his first mocajete from Tlaquepaque, Jalisco. So thank you. That our food is a way to share story. Our food is a way to share memories. And our food is a way to pass it down to the next generation. Even if you don't speak Spanish, even if you don't know the language, even though our indigenous traditions and roots, our languages have been erased, we're still here. So let's keep passing it on, even if it's through our food, because that is where story is so meaningful, is as we're sharing over a meal. Music. Story is in our music. Some of you have already mentioned the music, and you mentioned Selena when we were talking about urban legends. And so I'm going to show this next video clip about corridos. If anybody wants to put in the chat what a corrido is, feel free. It's I remember this video I saw online that said, don't worry if you don't know Spanish, neither did your indigenous ancestors. That's right, Samantha, because both Spanish and English are languages from the colonizer. It is our heart language because that is how we grew up, because we were colonized by the Spaniards, but we don't know our indigenous languages. And there's actually a return to finding indigenous languages and trying to pass them down to the next generation. Yes, Lupe, corridos are a story. And I found, I didn't have time to put all the content that I found. I found this clip of this teacher in Texas who has corridos as part of his music class with elementary age kids. Part of the class is, by the end of his class, every student will write a corrido. I thought it was beautiful. I just didn't have time for all of the videos that I found. So I am now going to play. This one is from PBS, and I'm going to have to stop sharing and then share again. And I sure hope that it doesn't play this big cats video. Let me close that one and then just have it open from here. Oh, here we go. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and start sharing with audio.
Experience fall in the San Juan Islands during the Savor the San Juan celebration with farm tours, farmers markets, wine and beer tastings, dinners, film festivals, and more in the San Juan Islands this fall.
The planet is changing. And now some of our most sacred sites and traditions are disappearing. But faith leaders are igniting change and inspiring a new path forward. I'm Gulnaz Khan. Join me as I explore stories of climate resilience and hope from around the world.
It's a song that tells a story. It tells a story of a person. It could be a hero. It could be just some historical event that took place. This particular type of corrido tradition song was created here in the Texas-Mexico border, which was this fusion of different cultures that came together on the border, right? Indigenous, the Spanish, the mestizo, the Mexican in Texas, the Tejano, right? And Mexican within the United States. And from this fusion of cultures, new song forms were born, like the corrido tradition. Really, it's world music, because it's a blending of world music.
Yeah.
Colombian cumbias, German, and Polish polkas and waltzes and schottisches.
Yeah, that's how you learn how to play that accordion, right?
That's right. That's exactly right. They brought over those rhythms with the accordion. We blended it to create something new.
Yes, that's incredible. But it's really important, the story, and that it's told from your perspective and your history.
That's exactly right. That we take control of the narrative. This is our story that we are telling for our people primarily. The corrido tradition and the songs within the corrido tradition were some of the earliest forms of protest music against these Anglo invaders and settlers that came in and took over the land here, the indigenous Mexican land, and committed massacres and atrocities, lynchings and killings, like from the Texas Rangers. So a lot of the early corridos are writing about this, and I think that our people obviously needed heroes, right? So our heroes then came in the form of the corrido that told the stories about these heroes that defended their rights human rights and civil rights against, Anglo racism and racist law. That's what the early corridos talk about. Later on, like I said, we have corridos about everything. Anytime anything is important to the Mexican-American, Chicano people, Tejano people, there's going to be a corrido about it. Like I said, Hurricane Beulah, about Archbishop Patrick Flores, about the first, modern Mexican-American mayor here in San Antonio, Henry Cisneros, and even the affair he had while he was in office.
Come on.
There's corridos about that, I'm telling you. About Selena when she passed away.
Why do you think that it had to be in song?
I think it had to be in song because the melody helps you to remember the words. And back then, when the corrido tradition started here in the mid-1800s, 1830s, again, there weren't these schools out there, there weren't these means of communication, these newspapers that reached certain people, so some people were illiterate. So the oral tradition then became even more important because it was through the songs and the poetries, the declamaciones, that these traveling minstrels or griots and the poet played for the people, and they would remember the stories and the songs. So it was education. It was like the news of the day for some people that were illiterate, that they got it by hearing the songs, and they passed it on through the oral tradition, these stories and these songs.
That's so cool. That's so cool. How are corridos a form of ritual?
That's a great question because I think when people think of music, they don't think that necessarily it's ritual. You sort of associate ritual more with ceremony.
Yes.
But I firmly believe that corridos and music in general and the arts in general, all of the arts are ritual. I mean, I wrote about our sacred Saturday night dances, right? Where the people come to gather when you're creating something, when you're performing even. An important part, I think, of the ritual that then you emanate to the entire community, right? And it connects you to each other, connects you to the divine, connects you to your culture, your history, your people. Our music, I think we have a higher calling with our arts and our music. It's not just we're creating music and art just for art's sake. It was always for the people.
More recently.
Feel free to share anything that stood out to you from that clip. And it goes on, it's at least 6 more minutes, but I love the ending where, just like the food, it's more than just art. It's the ritual, it's the stories, and making the connection between it being even spiritual and connecting with the divine and each other. I think it was, we had this conversation last week, that I grew up in a tradition that said that dancing was a sin. And here to make the connection that dancing is a ritual and connecting with the divine in your community. Where I think the dancing is a sin part came from colonization that tried to demonize our practices, our traditions, and they're still doing it today, trying to demonize our culture, our language, and our traditions. And so again, just our music and our food and our language just feels like a form of resistance. Close that one now. And just wanted to continue, let me share again with some other quick ways of sharing story, and then I'm going to end it with my story. And then opening it up for questions. I know some of you need to leave at 1. We're going until 1:15 so that we can then just have some time for discussion afterwards. But I'll try to share my story before it hits 1 o'clock. I'm going to share my screen right now. Okay, you should see it now. So the other form of story that I think about in our community is consejos and chisme. So what does that bring to mind when I say consejos and chisme? Again, I think family drama, Stefania. Thank you for sharing, Daisy. The grito, Gria, I love the connection, traditional and oral narrative. A chisme, a good sit down. That's right. Like, let's get some cafecito and get to it. Comadreando. Thank you, Lupe, for sharing that. Because I think that chisme we can translate as gossip, but I don't think that's what it means. It has a much more communal feel to it. As Lupe mentioned, comadreando. We call it chisme to have fun with it, but it really is comadreando, which also I don't know that translates either. It's about women getting together and just talking it up, laughing. Anita shared counseling and having fun chatting with my besties is chisme to me. Gossip and whisper networks is hated on because it keeps women safe and alive, and patriarchy is threatened by it. Thank you, Sedona. Yes, maybe it was. Maybe it was because they didn't want us chatting and sharing information that it was demonized and made into something negative. But I see consejos as those things shared by your elders and your abuelitas and your abuelitos, whether it's over a tortilla or as he's fixing the car and you're sitting there, as he's fixing his troca, and that connection that we have with our elders as a community, how we for the most part, our community holds our elders in high regard. My mother-in-law lived with us till she was 100 because we honored her as our abuelita, and and we try to do that as much as we can, is keep our elders in the home and respect them and honor their consejos. Even if you roll your eyes, try not to let her see you, where they're always just trying to give us guidance. And the chisme, I even remember telling my mom, no me gusta el chisme, because she was telling me things about my tia or whatever. And then I felt bad when I thought of it as, no, this is her way of sharing with me. This is her way of connecting with me. And then I never said it after that, and I went ahead and joined in the chisme. Because it was part of women getting together and talking, connecting, sharing. It's how we pass on information, needed information that maybe is kept from us from our employer or from the outsider, whoever that is. It's an act of solidarity. Thank you, Anita. Exactly. Standing with each other, hearing each other's stories. That's what it really is. Comadreando is sharing stories. Chisme is sharing stories. Yes, our tias can still get mean about it. But those same tias are the ones that are going to defend you as well. Even if they're talking crap about you one day, they're going to defend you in front of somebody who's not part of the familia. It's just how it works. But an act of solidarity. It's a way to give the news to community. So I couldn't get away from talking about story without recognizing those other forms of story that we have in our community, from our abuelitas to our tias to our abuelos. And then to share these dichos. This is what I was saying. If you know any of these dichos and you want to share in the chat what they mean, I'm going to read them, and then you tell me what they mean, if you know what they mean, or if you've ever heard of them or have a story about it. So we have dichos that get passed on and passed on. I'm not part of your family or related to you, but we've heard a lot of these same dichos or sayings. Donde comen dos, comen tres. Because we're so generous with our food that if I'm going to make a meal for 2 people, you're invited too, because it could easily feed 3. Dime con quién andas y te diré quién eres. Tell me who you hang around with and I'll tell you who you are. How many of us have heard that one and probably said it ourselves? El que madruga, Dios le ayuda. If you get up at dawn, God's going to help you. Cada quien por la suya. To each their own. And I taught this one to my son-in-law to tell my daughter-in-law, but no, that wasn't very nice. Te calmas o te calmo. You either calm down or I will calm you down. And my grandkids, sana, sana, colita de rana. Again, these do not literally translate well, but we know what they mean because they're dichos and sayings that have been passed on, and we could probably share a story about each of those. Some other sayings are things like ni modo. Again, I don't even know how you could how that translates. Que padre, que onda. Oh, I said que padre twice. Órale, me vale, ánimo, con ganas, pa'lante, no manches, y agua. Some of these I've never heard of, but I've heard other people say them. So, nada que ver, yes, Lupe. I always tell my kids, te calma, or te calmas or te calmo. Yes, probably better for a child than a spouse. And I like that too. It helps us build perspective as a community. And yes, DR, ride or die and everything. Yes, Addie. So I'm going to end our time, and then we'll have some question and answer with my story, which is hot off the press. I've never shared it before. I just finished it this morning, and you'll recognize some of the things I've shared today about food and music are included in my story. So here it goes. Let me see. And Addie gave me this idea. Some of you may have seen this format before. It's called Where I'm From. See if I can get it without getting emotional. Okay. I am from no name cereal and only knowing secondhand or homemade clothes. And I'm from homemade flour tortillas and frijoles de olla. I am from a one-room labor camp filled with cousins to play with and Casey Kasem's top 40 in my pink bedroom. I am from nopales, figs, and pomegranate trees whose fruit grew wild at my abuelita's house. I am from accordions and tambourines, from Martinez Garcia and Garza Casiano. I am from conjuntos and coritos, and living room full of música and Dios te bendiga, hermana. I am from Guadalupe, Juanita, and Minerva, from burritos, fideo, and TV dinners. From Jesus El Gallito Casiano, whose records live on at the Smithsonian, and resilient women who never received their flowers. I am from interpreting for my mom to seeing her fly her own wings. I am from all those moments, and now back with pride at the secondhand store, sewing and upcycling, teaching my grandchildren where we are from. Thank you. Again, to get emotional with that. So as our last question, what stories, and I'd like to just open it up for everyone if you can stick around beyond one, what stories will you pass down to the next generation? In the chat, or feel free to unmute. What stories will you pass down to the next generation? I'm reading your dichos in the chat. Nada que ver. Rub my owie with sana sana colita de rana. Y la papaya. Thank you, Ray. Yeah, we can stop recording now since people will be sharing their own stories. Oh, people are going to share. Jorge said the story